Let me have a look. Who listened to the podcast and what did you learn? Steve said, the idea of ad hoc feedback was great. Um, we have a feedback session in the week where it's obvious the bias. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about this. I love the idea that, I'm sorry, I love the idea of small feedback. Yeah, because a big part of the problem with feedback is it often feels like, well, it doesn't happen very often and it feels really formal. So it becomes this really big thing, it's really, really big thing. And then you get loads of fear and then, it's not helpful. So little and often is really important for feedback. It doesn't mean you can't have those kind of bigger feedback discussions, but really we want lots of learning happening. So we need lots of ways that we can add feedback in to our days rather than sort of it being this thing that gets parked until like the end of the year. Um, Fast feedback, yeah, Anna. So we need that quick feedback. Where it's room for improvement feedback. I'd like to have an example to understand better. Sean, I can talk about that. I can talk about a model that we use, a couple of different models for like, I guess room for improvement feedback can often feel like in the category of like a difficult message to deliver. What I don't want to do is what I don't want us to think is that feedback is always about difficult messages, because I think sometimes that's where people fall into like a trap of fearing feedback, where we assume that feedback is all about something I've done wrong. So I definitely want to present some stuff today that is about feedback being about what is going well and where we are having a positive impact. But if it is helpful, I can talk through a couple of extra models on how to deliver a slightly more difficult feedback message, if that is useful for you. Okay, approaching feedback for learning and the sandwich. So I thought what we might do, first of all, have a little bit of like community reflection before we go into like what can we do differently. I thought we'd just have like a moment of discussion. What do you think? And it's kind of, I think it's a bit of self-awareness really. When you are thinking about you and feedback, what do you think you personally need to stop doing? You personally. And if you feel that that is quite a vulnerable thing to put in front of a group of people you don't know, you can message me privately. So if you find Helen Tupper in the chat, you can let me know, and I might voice it, but I won't say your name. But I think it is really important just to think, for me personally, in how I approach feedback, what do I think that I need to stop doing? So let's start with stopping. What do you think? What do you think that you need to personally stop doing? Head into chat and let me know, so the group can see, or you can message me privately, whatever is easier. But in terms of your approach to feedback, your feedback patterns or habits, what do you think you might need to stop doing? Interesting. Thanks, Amika. So we've got some stuff here. Focusing on the negative. So always kind of having this kind of negative assumption to feedback. Let's get that down there. Not taking into context is their perspective, but is it helpful? That's interesting, Jude. So assuming that one person's opinion is everybody else's reality. Maybe that's what that is, when it's just one person's perspective, right? It's not, and you don't have to agree with it. Stop generic feedback asks and go for specific. So we want to stop kind of being so generic. Stop assuming, that's interesting, Steve. Stop assuming there is a massive underlining narrative to any constructive feedback. So potentially that's like the negativity bias in overdrive. So we all have like a negativity bias in our brain, and it's where we are more anchored to the what we don't do very well. And so someone might give you a bit of information about something you could improve upon. And then what happens is that kind of goes round and round and round your head on repeat. And it becomes like you're like, oh gosh, maybe they think more than that. Maybe this is a bigger deal. It goes round and round. So the risk with that kind of stuff is you end up in a bit of a spiral, a negative spiral of feedback. That's interesting, Katie. Katie is putting off asking for it because sometimes I don't know how to word it. And then you worry so much about how you word it that you don't ask for it, and then you're back to square one, aren't you? That's interesting, Manila. Thinking it needs to be a separate entity. Yeah, that's the adding on thing. Like that feedback is this thing that I need to make extra time for. It's an extra email I need to send. It's an extra thing I need to do, rather than me asking you for feedback in this session, which I probably should do. I mean, it would be a bit silly not to ask you for feedback on this session, given we're talking about feedback. Overthinking. Oh, that's interesting, Caroline. How self-aware. I need to stop adding comedy or softening when I give negative feedback. Yeah, they're kind of like, again, that can come from a bit of a confidence gremlin. That sort of either we either feeling like we need to be liked, or obviously a worry about what someone else is going to feel in response to this message. The thing that and this is probably one of my recommended starts, so maybe we'll share some of these together in a minute. But the thing that I would recommend doing, if you feel like you're a feedback softener, either because you have a confidence growing about needing to be liked, or you're so worried about how somebody else is going to feel in response to it, I always find the unclear is unkind statement very helpful. You know, if you're being wishy-washy for whatever reason, you've not prepared for the conversation, you feel like you want people to like you, so you don't want to be too mean or all that stuff. I always hold in my head, well, ultimately, unclear is unkind. And if your need to be nice is getting in the way of somebody else's growth, then that's a problem. I hold that in my head quite a lot because Caroline, I have some of those like traits when I'm giving feedback, but that's how I manage it. I kind of hold this statement in my head, like unclear is unkind. And I start with that in mind whenever I'm delivering messages. What else do you think you need to start then? So we've done a bit of like the gosh, I need to stop this. This is not helpful. So if you were like, okay, fresh start effect. What do you want to start doing? So maybe like I'm like, okay, I'm going to start with unclear is unkind in mind. Maybe you want to start just asking for more feedback. Maybe you want to start giving more feedback. Maybe you want to start helping other people with feedback more. I don't know, but if you were kind of, you're like being positive about this, what is something you want to start? Ask without fear. So we want to have I was going to put no fear, but I feel that might be a bit unrealistic. So I'm gonna put low fear. No fear feels like probably a big shift from where some people might be starting. So no or low, but low. Unclear is unkind, radical candor. It is on the lit vid. Yeah, good link, Caroline. So unclear is unkind is a statement from Kim Scott's work. Kim Scott is the author of a book called Radical Candor, and that is on the lit video library. So if you have got access, give it a little watch. She's also been on our podcast too, so you can listen. Ask more than twice a year. Yeah, success for Sam. 3 times, just 3 times. No, but once a quarter. But yeah, I think that's actually quite a concrete thing though. Like if I currently ask twice a year, wouldn't it be amazing if I doubled it? I mean, it's still going to be a lot better. It's not like the monthly feedback, but that might feel like too big an aim to begin with. So just like once a quarter would be good. Enjoyed Skim's video, but great. Clear deliverables. Sharing feedback to seniors. Tell you one thing, if any of you are managers in here, one thing that you could also start doing is getting feedback on feedback, which I appreciate sounds a bit meta, but if you're a manager, like speak to your team, like how effective do you feel like feedback is in the team at the moment from, you to me to you, us to us all, like when do you think we could give each other more feedback? How could that feedback be more effective? Just some nice open questions, like get some feedback on feedback. I think that's probably a useful conversation for you to have as a manager. Okay, so good bit of reflection to start with. What I thought we would now do is just go through some of the start and stops that we talked about on the podcast. I might kind of recap a couple of the ideas that Sarah and I went through, and then get your builds if that works. And then leave a couple of minutes at the end for some sort of news. I'm making like as a big thing. It's not that big a thing. I think it's quite exciting. We'll see. It's an experiment, podcast experiment. Okay, first stop and start is the idea that feedback is like just this ad hoc thing that, it'll just happen. It'll just happen. Like, I'm open to feedback. And I'm just, when it happens, I'll be happy. This kind of like ad hoc approach to it. The risk with feedback just being ad hoc is that if it doesn't actually happen, then you lose the learning, right? If we're just in sort of ad hoc feedback mode, we will miss lots of opportunities to be more intentional about feedback. So really what we want to start doing is making sure that we are like always on for feedback. We are very intentional about adding feedback in to our work rather than sort of hoping that it will happen. And so a couple of things we talked about. Well, it's sort of, we did talk about this on the podcast, but I think it's just my reflections in hindsight about how you are intentional about making sure that your feedback is always on. Just some things that work for me, to make sure that feedback is part of like the way that I'm working, not something I'm waiting for. So I think a really good way of making sure it's always on is at the end of a day, just reflecting, and you'll know this if you follow us because we talk about it all the time, just a what worked well, even better if. Even if just you I would self-reflect and I might ask one person. Like, I don't know how many people you talk to in a day, but I between our team and people we work with, there is somebody every day that I could ask for feedback on. So I could self-reflect, what do I think worked well today and what would be even better if, and I could just ask one person on one meeting or one conversation or, one email that I've sent. Like, what do you think worked well in that moment and what would be even better if? And I think if you did that at the end of the day for like a week, I mean, it's probably a bit intense to do every day forever, but you would quickly accumulate a lot of learning if you kind of had that sort of approach to it. I was also thinking in the day, always on before a meeting. So I think a trap that a lot of people do with feedback is they ask for feedback after the moment, right? So I ask you, I mean, I've just done it, right? I was like, oh, at the end of PodPlus today, I'm going to ask you for what worked well, even better if feedback. That is better than not asking for feedback. But what would be even better is if at the start of this meeting, I had said, one of the things that I'm really focused on is making sure that people who come to PodPlus have an easy action that they can share with somebody else. Because I think we are all advocates and I want the learning to go further than this conversation. So I'd love to get some feedback from you at the end of PodPlus about, how effectively you think I talked through actions that you can share with other people. The reason that we do that is like framing the feedback. So asking in advance gives you something to focus on. It gives you a frame to look through. So you're sat here both learning, but also thinking, to what extent does this meet the thing that Helen wanted? Like, to what extent has Helen really given me a useful action I could share with somebody else? So, like with feedback, it's really good to prime people in advance of the moment, not just ask them after the moment. That makes sense. Good way to kind of have always on feedback. You'll get higher quality feedback if you do it. And then the other thing that I think you could do, like at the end of the week, because often feedback feels quite hard, there's loads of reasons why people worry about giving feedback, worried about what you think, all that kind of stuff. There's loads of reasons why people fear. I think scales are really helpful. I think scales get around a lot of the fear that comes with feedback. So let's say I might say, to that I might think, but because my team are here, I know some of them are here. Like Lucy is in my team, and one of the things, hopefully Lucy doesn't mind me outing this, but one of the things that like Lucy values is efficiency. She's brilliant at it. One of the things that I should probably work on to make Lucy's life easier is efficiency. But I could say to Lucy, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate my efficiency this week? And Lucy is probably going to go, well, Helen, that was that moment when you showed me your notes and I've had to nudge you 5 times for things. So probably I'll give it, probably this week, you're probably coming in at a 6 or a 7. And then I can go, okay, thank you for that. If next week I was to make that, let's be realistic, an 8, I'm not going to get to 10. I'm never going to be Lucy levels of efficiency. But if I was going to get to an 8, what is one thing that you think I could do? And I mean, it would be a useful conversation that probably make Lucy's life easier, to be honest. But my bigger point is scales simplify difficult messages. Like, rather than Lucy having to think, oh gosh, I need to give Helen some information about how she's like inefficient at work or all that kind of stuff, actually presenting people with a scale and saying, well, if it was going to get 1 point better or 2 points better, like what would that look like? It makes the conversation a bit easier for people to have. So that is my ideas for adding a bit of always. What are your thoughts? What are your builds? Steve's in there with a build straight away. I often use the 7th coaching question from Michael Bungay Stainer. I like him. Wonder whether we should get him on the podcast. What was most useful in this session today? Really good way to dig deeper into coaching. Yes. Framing that question up front might leave different answers. Nice little experiment, Steve, actually, with framing it up front and what's the impact of the quality of the feedback. Making me think of the 1%, grow 1% every day. Yeah, Sarah and I get really confused with that, Claire, because it's like, I think it's something about compounding. So if you get 1% better every day, it's something like you'll be 38% better by the end of the year. Like, oh my gosh, that's why is it that? But it's some kind of compounding effect thing that comes up. Some of you will be way more mathsy than me, and you'll be like, well, obviously, Helen. But it confuses me every time I look at it, and I'm like, 38% better by the end of the year. Anyway, any other thoughts or builds before we move on to our next one? I might move us on in the interest of time, if that is all right, lovely learners. Okay, so the next one was shifting from feedback being all about weaknesses. And I'm obviously not saying you can't have feedback about areas you need to improve upon, but when that is the only feedback that we are getting or giving, it's problematic, because actually people make the biggest impact and have the biggest energy when they are working with their strengths. So we need to make sure we are giving and getting feedback on where we have a positive impact. And so that can sound, statements that we will often use here. I see you at your best when, or you can flip that and you can say, when do you see me at my best? This is you giving someone feedback. This is you kind of getting feedback, and they're really really useful questions to ask people. And it's really positive feedback, so it makes you feel good. But I think beyond making you feel good, there is a really important insight that comes from this kind of feedback. And that is, and again, lots of you will know this, but sometimes I think like repeating things is useful. And one of the things that I do repeat quite a lot is this idea of understanding the difference between your intent and your impact. And this question helps you to get to that. So your intent is, what do you want people to say about you? What is the impact that you want to have at work? So I want to energize people. I want people to spend time with me and to feel like confident and motivated to take action. Like that's what I really care about. That's what all this energy is for. And so if that is my intent, but then I go and ask people, or when do you see me at my best? And they go, when you did that really thoughtful research report, or when you corrected my email. And it's not that is bad, but if what I want to be known for is helping people take action, create energy in other people, if that's what I want to be known for, and people tell me, oh, your spreadsheet was brilliant, like it's a bit of an issue. So there's like a double win, I think, to this. One, you will get and give feedback that gives people energy. Like you will, because they'll be like, oh, that's great to hear that. But also you'll help people understand whether they are showing up in the way that they want to at work. And that will either be reinforcing feedback, brilliant, I'm having the impact I want, or it will be an opportunity for development, because they might have a sort of a gap between their intent and their impact. So it's really useful questions. We also, one thing I think in Squiggly Careers is, what 3 words would they use to describe you? I love that exercise. Go ask 5 people, like do it via Teams or WhatsApp or whatever you're using, but it's got to be quick. And you can use this as an excuse, like, I've been in a Squiggly session. Could you just tell me 3 words to use to describe me at my best? And then you get loads of really quick data about your impact that you can compare with your intent. Did the 3 words exercise last year. Yay, it's nice. It's nice. And sometimes you kind of understand your blind spots, right? Where people play back to you strengths that you didn't realize you kind of had. So you don't really know what you're going to learn until you ask the question, but you got nothing to lose. You got nothing, because all they're going to do is say some good stuff about you. And it's quite a nice little activity to add in. Okay, last but not least, outsourcing. We got to stop. Outsourcing means it's my manager's job to give me feedback. Outsourcing means the HR process says we do feedback in December. Like you're in wait mode and you're making your development dependent on other people. That's just not helpful. Not helpful. You're going to miss lots of learning. You're not taking ownership for your development. And we in Squiggly Careers, we really need to do that. So we need to own it. We need to own it. We talked a few things on the podcast, but on reflection, I think the easiest way of owning your feedback is to just work through a couple of question prompts. So kind of what feedback would be useful for me? Who is the best person to give it to me? When am I going to ask them, and how? That's like sort of what's the question. I honestly think if you just did that at the start of a month, if you start like, what feedback do I want this month? Who is best positioned to give me this feedback? When am I going to make the ask? And how am I going to do it? I'm going to send them an email. I'm going to say, oh, I'd like to do it in our one-to-one because I'd like to talk it through with you. Like, just those questions will provide you more of a focus for you to get the feedback. Like most of the time, I don't think we take a moment to like ask those questions. And so it's like we're sort of lucky if it happens, or we just default to kind of the internal processes that enable it. But like asking yourself those questions regularly would be useful. Oh, I can hear a child. There's some cute child somewhere, I think. Hello, child. The thing, just very quickly, because Sean asked for difficult message stuff. Can I just do that really quickly for you? Let us do it on here. A model that I personally find useful when I am thinking about a tougher conversation or a difficult message. The challenge here is that you can get wishy-washy and waffly because you're worried about what someone else is thinking or feeling. And your emotions can cloud your clarity. Like that's the issue with difficult messages. So what I do, I've always found the COIN model here really helpful. So COIN stands for context, kind of what's going on at the moment, observation, what have I seen, impact on me, team, your whatever you're doing, the project, and then kind of needs and next steps. The trick with this model is, first of all, prepare it on your own. Like literally go through and go, what's happening at the moment? What am I actually seeing? Like write it down. You've got to prepare this. And then when you have the conversation, you want to split it up. So first of all, I would do this. Like if I'm actually having the conversation, I would say, this is what is happening at the moment. This is what I've seen. What's your perspective? Like invite them into the discussion. Then I'd say, this is what I think of the impact on ... is. What's your view? Then I'd be like, this is what I think we should do. What's your take on that? Like you need to invite them into the conversation or it will feel like a confrontation. So preparing gives you clarity, it makes you a bit more objective, but having the conversation, just make sure you involve somebody in it rather than just going, I think you're not very good at the moment and you keep interrupting me in meetings and it's making me really frustrating. Oh, you're like, not going to help. You're going to put their back up. They're going to like, it's not going to feel good. So that's very quickly the model that I'd recommend.